After working 35 years building my company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, I finally sold it to attend my daughter Catherine's wedding. What I didn't expect was to be seated alone in the corner while my ex-husband and his new wife enjoyed the place of honor at the head table. After running a successful tech company for over 3 decades, I had finally decided to retire. Catherine was getting married to Bradley, the son of a prominent family in our city, and I wanted to focus on helping with wedding preparations. I had saved diligently throughout my career, living modestly despite my success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My ex-husband, Richard, had always criticized my dedication to work, claiming it took away from family time. When we divorced 15 years ago, he took primary custody of Catherine, convincing the court that my work schedule made me an unsuitable primary parent. Despite this, I maintained a close relationship with Catherine through her childhood and into adulthood. I never missed a birthday, school event, or holiday when she was with me. I paid for her private schooling, her college education at Princeton, and her graduate degree at Stanford. When Richard faced financial difficulties after his real estate investments collapsed, I discreetly helped with Catherine's expenses without letting her know her father was struggling. I wanted to preserve her respect for him. When Catherine called to tell me she was engaged, I was overjoyed. Bradley came from the Wellington family, known for their chain of luxury hotels. I immediately offered to pay for the wedding, wanting to give my daughter the celebration she deserved. "Mom, that's so generous, but Bradley's parents have already offered," Catherine told me. "Well, at least let me contribute something," I insisted. "How about the honeymoon? I could arrange a month-long tour of Europe, all expenses paid," Catherine hesitated before responding. "Actually, the Wellingtons have their own villa in Tuscany they're letting us use. But maybe you could handle the rehearsal dinner?" I agreed, though something in her tone bothered me. Over the following weeks, I noticed I was being gradually sidelined in the wedding planning. The Wellingtons seemed to have taken over everything, with Richard and his new wife Victoria somehow involved in all major decisions. The weekend before the wedding, I received a call from Catherine's wedding planner, Margot. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm finalizing the seating arrangements and wanted to confirm your preferences. We have you seated at table 14. "Table 14? I repeated, confused. I assumed I'd be at the head table with Catherine and Bradley. There was an uncomfortable pause. "I'm sorry, but the head table is reserved for the bride, groom, Bradley's parents, and Mr. Harrison and his wife. Catherine approved this arrangement last month." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "I see. And where exactly is table 14? "It's near the back, by the kitchen entrance," Margot replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Catherine thought you might prefer a quieter spot since you don't know many of the guests." I took a deep breath, trying to process this information. Throughout Catherine's life, I had stepped aside countless times, allowing Richard to take credit for things I had provided, never contradicting the narrative he created that portrayed him as the devoted parent, while I was the career-obsessed mother who chose work over family. "That won't be necessary," I said calmly. "Please seat me wherever you've placed my fellow investors from the Children's Hospital Foundation." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison, but I don't have any record of guests from the foundation being invited." This revelation stung even more than the seating arrangement. The Children's Hospital Foundation was my primary philanthropic focus. I had donated millions over the years and had recently been discussing a major new pediatric research center with the board, something Catherine knew was deeply important to me. "I see," I said simply. "Thank you for calling, Margot." That evening, I received a text from Catherine. "Mom, is everything okay? Margot mentioned you were upset about the seating." I considered my response carefully. "Just surprised. I didn't realize I wouldn't be seated with you." Her reply came quickly. "Please don't make this difficult. The Wellingtons are very traditional and feel the seating should reflect proper family structure. Dad is walking me down the aisle, so he and Victoria should be at the head table. You'll be comfortable at your own table where you can leave early if you need to get back to work. I stared at the message, the familiar accusation about work stinging, even though I had literally sold my company to be more available. I didn't respond. The next morning, I drove to the office of my financial advisor, Samuel Matthews. "Good to see you, Eleanor," Sam greeted me warmly. "How are wedding preparations? Going?" "Illuminating," I replied. "I need to make some changes to my financial arrangements before Saturday." Sam looked concerned. "That's quite rushed. What did you have in mind?" "I want to accelerate the donation we've been discussing for the Children's Hospital Foundation. Instead of spreading it over 5 years, I want to make the full $10 million donation immediately, with the announcement at the foundation gala next month." Sam raised his eyebrows. "That's a significant acceleration. May I ask why the sudden urgency?" I smiled thinly. "Let's just say I've gained some clarity about where my priorities should lie. Also, I'll need a cashier's check for $50,000 by Friday." "For the wedding gift?" Sam asked. "Something like that," I replied. When I arrived home, I found an email from Bradley's mother, Camilla Wellington, with the subject line, "Rehearsal dinner adjustments." She had taken the liberty of updating the arrangements I had made, changing the venue from the intimate French restaurant I had selected to their country club, revising the menu I had carefully planned, and even altering the guest list to include several of their business associates. The email concluded with, "We felt these changes would better reflect the standards the Wellington family upholds. The country club has graciously agreed to bill you directly for the increased costs. I'm sure you understand." I did understand, far more clearly than Camilla realized. The message wasn't subtle. I wasn't good enough. Despite building a tech company valued at over $75 million, despite my philanthropy and community standing, I was still viewed as an outsider by the Wellingtons. And somehow, they had convinced my daughter to see me the same way. I typed a polite response agreeing to the changes, then opened my laptop to review the speech I had been preparing for the rehearsal dinner. With a few keystrokes, I deleted the entire document and started fresh. The day of the rehearsal arrived, and I entered the Wellington Country Club dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, my mother's pearls around my neck. Richard immediately approached with Victoria on his arm. "Eleanor." He nodded stiffly. "I hope you're not planning to make a scene about the seating arrangements. Catherine is very stressed, and she doesn't need you adding to it." "Hello, Richard," I replied calmly. "Victoria, don't worry. I've accepted my place in all this." His relief was palpable as he guided Victoria away, never suspecting what I had planned for the following day. The rehearsal dinner proceeded exactly as the Wellingtons had orchestrated. I sat at a table near the kitchen with distant relatives of Bradley who seemed confused about who I was. When it came time for speeches, Camilla Wellington stood first, speaking at length about family legacy and how delighted they were to welcome Catherine into their distinguished lineage. Richard followed with an emotional speech about raising Catherine as a single father, conveniently omitting the substantial financial support I had provided throughout her life. When my turn came, I kept my remarks brief and gracious, congratulating the couple and thanking the Wellingtons for their hospitality. I caught Catherine's look of relief when I didn't mention my contributions to her upbringing or education. It was as if my daughter was ashamed of me, the woman who had built a tech empire from nothing while ensuring she never wanted for anything. After the dinner, I overheard a conversation that made everything painfully clear. In the hallway outside, the restrooms, Catherine was speaking with Victoria, my ex-husband's wife of 8 years. "I'm so relieved," Catherine said. "I was worried Mom would make this all about her success or her company. You know how she gets always talking about her achievements." Victoria laughed softly. "Your father was concerned too. He said she might use the opportunity to remind everyone how she paid for your education." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. God, that would be so embarrassing. Catherine replied. The Wellingtons are old money. They'd be horrified by that kind of new money talk. Bradley's father already made a comment about tech entrepreneurs being glorified computer repairmen. I stood frozen, out of sight, as Victoria continued. Well, at least you managed to seat her far away from everyone important. And it was smart to keep her investors from that hospital charity off the guest list. Can you imagine them talking about sick children at a wedding? I know, Catherine sighed. Mom just doesn't understand social cues. Honestly, I'm glad she'll be at table 14 tomorrow. The photographer won't even notice her there, which is perfect for the wedding album. They walked away, still talking, while I remained rooted to the spot. The daughter I had raised, supported, and loved unconditionally was actively working to minimize my presence at her wedding. Not because I had been a bad mother, but because she was ashamed of how I had earned my success. My mind flashed back to the countless nights I had worked late, developing the software that would eventually revolutionize supply chain management. How I had taken investor calls from hospital rooms when Catherine was sick with childhood illnesses. How I had built my business around Catherine's schedule whenever possible, attending parent-teacher conferences and dance recitals even when it meant losing potential clients. I thought about the college tuition checks I wrote without complaint. The apartment I purchased near Stanford, so Catherine wouldn't have to worry about housing during graduate school. The connections I had leveraged to help her secure internships at prestigious firms. All while Richard played the role of doting father, never missing an opportunity to remind Catherine that my work kept me from being fully present. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I reviewed my financial records, looking at every expenditure I had made for Catherine over the years. The total was staggering. Beyond the obvious expenses of education and housing, there were countless smaller contributions. The emergency credit card I maintained for her, the car insurance I still paid, the health insurance coverage she remained on until last year. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the director of the Children's Hospital Foundation. Eleanor, this is a surprise, she answered. I thought you'd be busy with wedding preparations. I'd like to move up our timeline, I said without preamble. Instead of announcing the donation at next month's gala, I want to do it today. Today? She sounded startled. But we haven't prepared any press materials or invited media. That won't be necessary, I assured her. I'll handle the announcement personally. I just need you to confirm that you can accept the donation immediately, and that the research center will proceed as planned. After some discussion, Elizabeth agreed, clearly confused but unwilling to risk losing a $10 million donation. I gave her the details of my daughter's wedding reception, asking her to send a representative to arrive at precisely 7:30 p.m. during the scheduled toasts. Next, I called my assistant Rachel, who had stayed on to help me transition into retirement. Need you to prepare 2 documents, I instructed her. First, a comprehensive record of all financial support I've provided to Catherine since the divorce. Second, I need the most recent valuation of Harrison Tech, specifically highlighting the portions of the company that Richard attempted to claim during our divorce proceedings. Is everything all right? Rachel asked, concern evident in her voice. It will be, I replied. And Rachel? I'll need you to deliver these documents to me at the Wellington Hotel ballroom at exactly 7:15 this evening. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful, if painful. I watched from the 5th row as Richard walked Catherine down the aisle, both beaming with pride. The Wellingtons sat in the front row, elegantly attired and looking every bit the distinguished family they purported to be. At the reception, I was indeed seated at table 14, near the kitchen as promised, with elderly relatives who seemed to have been placed with me for similar reasons of invisibility. I ate little of the elaborate meal, checking my watch frequently, as 7:15 approached. Right on schedule, Rachel appeared at my table, discreetly passing me a sleek portfolio before disappearing into the crowd. At 7:25, I saw Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the Foundation's Chief of Pediatric Research, enter the ballroom, looking uncertain. I nodded to her from across the room and she took a position near the back wall. At 7:30, the DJ announced it was time for toasts. Bradley's father went first, followed by his best man. Richard stood to speak next, raising his glass to his beautiful daughter and taking credit for raising such an accomplished young woman. I noted that Catherine's eyes glistened with tears as her father spoke, while Camilla Wellington nodded approvingly. When Richard finished to enthusiastic applause, I stood and walked deliberately toward the head table. The DJ, looking confused, hesitantly announced, "And now a few words from the mother of the bride." I could see Catherine's expression shift from surprise to alarm as I approached with the microphone. Richard half rose from his seat, as if to intercept me, but I was already standing before the assembled guests. "I won't take much of your time," I began, my voice steady. "I know my place at this wedding has been carefully determined, and it's not here at the front of the room?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Catherine's face had gone pale. However, I wanted to take this opportunity to announce something important. Today, in honor of my daughter's wedding, I am donating $10 million to the Children's Hospital Foundation to establish the Catherine Harrison Pediatric Research Center. The room fell completely silent. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward at my gesture, joining me at the front of the room. "This center," I continued, "will focus on developing treatments for childhood diseases and ensuring that medical care is available to all children, regardless of their family's financial circumstances, because I believe that every child deserves support, recognition, and the chance to thrive, even when it's inconvenient for those around them." I turned to look directly at Catherine, whose expression had transformed from embarrassment to shock. "I've spent my life building success not for my own glory, but to ensure my daughter would have every opportunity possible. I've never been ashamed of working hard to provide those opportunities, even when others judged me for it." I nodded to Dr. Reynolds, who stepped forward to accept the ceremonial check I produced from the portfolio. Flashbulbs popped as guests captured the moment on their phones. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I concluded, "I'll return to my table by the kitchen. I wouldn't want to disrupt the proper family structure of this celebration." As I returned to my seat at table 14, the ballroom erupted in confused murmurs. I could see Camilla Wellington leaning over to whisper urgently to her husband, while Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Catherine sat frozen, her champagne glass clutched in a white-knuckled grip as she stared at me in disbelief. The DJ, trying desperately to recover the festive atmosphere, quickly announced the first dance. Bradley gently pulled Catherine to her feet and led her to the dance floor, though her movements were mechanical, her eyes still darting in my direction. At my table, the elderly relatives who had barely acknowledged me all evening suddenly became intensely interested in my presence. "Did you say $10 million?" asked the aunt seated beside me, her hearing aid now apparently working perfectly. I smiled politely. "Yes, it's a cause close to my heart." "And you built a technology company?" asked another relative, squinting at me with newfound respect. "Harrison Tech. We pioneered adaptive supply chain management software. I sold it last month for just over $75 million. Their expressions were almost comical, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and the rapid recalculation that occurs when someone you've dismissed turns out to be significant. I excused myself and walked to the bar, where Rachel was waiting with a glass of champagne. "That was quite a statement," she said, handing me the drink. "How does it feel?" I took a long sip before answering. "Bittersweet, but necessary." Catherine looks shell-shocked. "She'll recover." The Wellingtons strike me as the type who quickly adapt to being in proximity to money, regardless of its source. As if on cue, I noticed Bradley's father making his way toward us. his expression carefully composed into a cordial smile. Rachel tactfully stepped away as he approached. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "Charles Wellington. I don't believe we've had a proper introduction." "Eleanor," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Though I believe you've referred to me as a glorified computer repairman in certain circles." He had the decency to look momentarily flustered before recovering. "A regrettable misunderstanding. Your generous contribution to pediatric research is most impressive. The Wellington family has a long tradition of philanthropy ourselves." "How fortunate for those children," I replied evenly. "If you'll excuse me, I see Dr. Reynolds preparing to leave." I walked away before he could respond, crossing the room to speak with the foundation representative. As we confirmed the details of the donation, I noticed Richard approaching, his new wife attempting to hold him back. "Eleanor," he hissed, barely containing his anger. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "Making a charitable donation," I replied calmly. "I believe that's still legal in this state." "You're deliberately upstaging our daughter's wedding. This is supposed to be her day." "Is it?" "From where?" "I've been sitting, quite literally, at the back of the room. This seems more like a Wellington family showcase, with you playing the role of proud patriarch." Victoria tugged at his arm. "Richard, people are watching." He lowered his voice. "You've always been like this, always having to prove you're the smartest, the most successful, the most important person in the room." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the early years of our marriage when he had supported my ambitions, before my success had begun to eclipse his own. "No, Richard, I've always been exactly who I am, someone who builds things that last. The only difference is that I've stopped apologizing for it." I turned to Dr. Reynolds. "Please send me the final paperwork tomorrow. I'll be leaving shortly." As Dr. Reynolds departed, Catherine approached, her new husband hovering anxiously behind her. Her face was flushed, whether from dancing or emotion I couldn't tell. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "could we speak privately?" We moved to a small, ante-room off the main ballroom. Catherine closed the door behind us, then turned to face me. "How could you do this?" she demanded. "Did you have to make such a scene?" I wasn't aware that charitable giving constituted a scene. "You know exactly what you did. You hijacked my wedding to make some kind of point." I studied my daughter's face, the face I had gazed at in wonder when she was born, had wiped tears from countless times, had watched mature into the beautiful woman before me. "Do you know why I named the research center after you?" I asked quietly. She crossed her arms defensively. "To embarrass me?" Because despite everything, despite being seated at table 14, despite being excluded from the wedding planning, despite overhearing you and Victoria discussing how to minimize my presence in your wedding photos, I am still proud to be your mother. Catherine's eyes widened. "You heard that conversation?" I did. Just as I heard Bradley's father's assessment of my career. She had the grace to look ashamed. "Mom, it's not what you think. The Wellingtons are they're different from us. They have certain expectations about family and tradition. And those expectations required you to treat your mother like an embarrassing secret. You don't understand how important this connection is for me, for my future." I nodded slowly. "I think I understand perfectly. You believe the Wellingtons can give you something I can't. Social standing. Acceptance into a world that values family names over personal achievement." "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "What's not fair, Catherine, is that you've spent your life benefiting from my work while simultaneously being ashamed of it. The education I paid for, the apartment I bought you, the connections I leveraged for your internships, all of these came from being a glorified computer repairman." I reached into the portfolio Rachel had brought me and removed a single document. "This is a record of the financial support I've provided since your father and I divorced. I'm not showing it to you to make you feel guilty, but to help you understand something important. There is dignity in building something from nothing. There is honor in working hard to provide opportunities for your child. Catherine took the paper with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she scanned the figures. I had no idea it was this much. Of course you didn't. Because a good parent doesn't keep score or demand recognition. But a good child, Catherine, doesn't erase their parents' existence to impress people like the Wellingtons. Tears filled her eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted everything to be perfect. Perfect? For whom? For your father, who's been taking credit for my financial contributions for 15 years? For your in-laws, who judged me without ever meeting me? Or for yourself, because you've somehow come to believe that my success is something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated? Catherine stared at the financial document, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, I replied, my voice softening slightly. This is your wedding day, and despite everything, I want you to enjoy it. She looked up at me, confusion in her eyes. You're not taking back the donation? I couldn't help but laugh. No, Catherine, that's not how charitable giving works. The donation is real, and it will help countless children. The fact that you immediately wondered if it was some kind of manipulation suggests you've spent too much time around your father. She flinched at that, but didn't argue. I should get back to the reception, I said, moving toward the door. Your new family will be wondering where you've gone. Wait, Catherine reached out, catching my arm. Are you really leaving? I think my presence has caused enough disruption for one evening. Table 14 will survive without me. Mom? She hesitated, conflict evident on her face. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the little girl who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, expecting me to fix everything. I'm sorry. I nodded, acknowledging her apology without accepting it. Some wounds wouldn't heal with simple words. Enjoy your honeymoon in Tuscany. The villa is lovely this time of year. As I opened the door, I found Richard waiting outside, clearly having attempted to eavesdrop. Behind him, Charles Wellington and his wife were engaged in intense conversation with Bradley, who kept glancing anxiously toward the anteroom where Catherine and I had been speaking. Is everything all right? Richard asked, his concern directed entirely at Catherine. Everything's fine, I answered before she could speak. Catherine is just processing the fact that her childhood wasn't funded by magical fairy dust, but by her mother's hard work. Now listen here, Richard began, but Catherine interrupted. Him. Dad, don't. Please. She wiped at her tears, visibly attempting to regain her composure. I need to fix my makeup before we cut the cake. I used the moment to slip away, retrieving my purse from table 14 and making my way toward the exit. As I crossed the ballroom, I heard my name called. Turning, I saw Bradley hurrying toward me. Mrs. Harrison, please wait, he said, slightly, out of breath. I want to apologize. I raised an eyebrow. For what, specifically? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. For all of this, the seating arrangement, the way you've been treated, I should have stepped in. Yes, you should have, I agreed. But you wanted to impress your parents as much as Catherine did. He didn't deny it. The donation you made, it's incredible. I work with several children's charities myself, and that kind of funding, it will change lives. I know, I said, simply. That's why I did it. Are you really leaving? I am. Please give my regards to your parents. Tell them I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to discuss my glorified computer repair business in more detail. Bradley winced. My father can be traditional in his views. Traditional is a diplomatic way of saying snobbish, I replied. But then I've never been particularly diplomatic. Another failing, I'm sure. As I turned to leave, Bradley surprised me by saying, I built an app in college, nothing fancy, just a way to track and coordinate charitable donations for campus fundraisers. I always wanted to develop it further, But my father— For the first time, I looked at my new son-in-law with genuine interest. "What programming language did you use?" "Python, with a React front end," he replied, a spark of enthusiasm breaking through his polished exterior. "I wanted to implement blockchain verification for donation transparency, but never got that far." I found myself smiling genuinely. "That's actually not a bad idea. The foundation could use something like that." For a moment, we connected over this shared interest, this glimpse of the person he might have been without the weight of Wellington expectations. "If you're ever interested in discussing it further," I said, reaching into my purse for a business card, "call me. Despite being retired, I still know people in the industry." He took the card carefully, as if it were something precious. "I might take you up on that." "Good. Now I really must go. Congratulations on your marriage. Take care of my daughter." As I walked out of the Wellington Hotel, the night air felt refreshingly cool after the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. My driver was waiting as arranged, and as we pulled away, I allowed myself one backward glance at the grand building illuminated against the night sky. 3 days later, I was sitting in my home office reviewing some investment proposals when my phone rang. Expecting it to be Dr. Chen with an update on the research center, I was surprised to see Catherine's name on the caller ID. "Hello, Catherine," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Mom." Her voice sounded hesitant. "Are you busy?" "Just reviewing some paperwork. How's married life?" We haven't left for Tuscany yet." "That's actually why I'm calling." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. "Bradley and I have been talking," she continued. "About the wedding, about how you were treated, and about other things too." "Such as?" "Such as his app idea. The one he told you about. He hasn't been able to stop talking about your conversation." This surprised me. It was a brief exchange, but it meant something to him. He's never had anyone in the family take his tech interests seriously before. She paused. "It made me realize that I've spent so long trying to fit into the Wellington world that I've been denying parts of myself, parts that come from you." I remained silent, processing her words. "We're postponing the Tuscany trip," she continued. "Bradley wants to work on his app idea, and I think I'd like to be involved, too. I did minor in computer science, you know." "I remember," I said softly. "You were quite good at it before you switched your focus to business administration." "Because I thought that's what would impress the right people," she admitted. "But watching you stand up there, announcing that donation without apology, owning your success, it reminded me of how I used to feel watching you work when I was little, before Dad started telling me that your work was taking you away from me." I closed, my eyes feeling an old pain resurface. "Catherine, no, please let me finish. I've been thinking about what you said, about dignity and building something from nothing. I want that feeling. I've spent so long trying to be accepted by people who will never truly respect where I come from." "Where we come from?" I found myself smiling slightly. "And what does your new husband think about all this soul-searching?" "He's having his own epiphany. Turns out we both married into families with expectations that were suffocating us in different ways." She paused. "We're coming over tomorrow. Bradley wants to show you his prototype, and I'd like to talk. Really talk. If that's okay with you." I thought about all the years of misunderstanding, of Richard's subtle undermining, of Catherine's gradual drift toward valuing status over substance. One conversation wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. "I'll be here," I said. "And Catherine, bring your appetite. I'll make that pasta you used to love. With the garlic bread and too. Much cheese?" she asked, a smile evident in her voice. "Some traditions are worth keeping," I replied. The following day, I found myself in the kitchen preparing Catherine's favorite pasta for the first time in years. As I chopped garlic and grated cheese, I reflected on how unexpected life could be. 3 days ago, I had walked out of my daughter's wedding reception feeling more distant from her than ever. Now I was cooking her comfort food and preparing to potentially mentor my new son-in-law. The doorbell rang precisely at noon. When I opened the door, I was struck by how different Catherine and Bradley looked compared to their wedding day. Gone were the formal attire and perfect styling. Catherine wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Bradley was similarly dressed down in khakis and a polo shirt, carrying a laptop bag. "Hi, Mom," Catherine said, hesitating slightly before stepping forward to embrace me. The hug was tentative at first, then tightened as I returned it. "Something smells amazing," Bradley commented as they entered the house. "Just a simple pasta. Nothing like the Wellington. Chef prepares, I'm sure," I replied, unable to completely resist the small dig. Catherine caught my eye. "Actually, the food at the Wellington estate is terrible. Everything looks beautiful but tastes like cardboard. It's all about appearance." "How fitting," I remarked dryly, leading them into the kitchen. "Wine?" "Please," they answered in unison, then laughed. As I poured 3 glasses of Cabernet, Bradley set up his laptop on the counter. "I've been working on this almost non-stop since the wedding," he explained, his enthusiasm palpable. "After our conversation, I realized how much I've missed this. Actual creation instead of just managing family investments." I glanced at Catherine, who was watching her husband with a softness in her expression I hadn't seen before. "He was up until 4 a.m. coding," she said. "I've never seen him so energized." Over lunch, Bradley walked me through his donation transparency platform. The concept was solid, though the execution needed refinement. I found myself genuinely impressed by his technical knowledge and vision. "You never mentioned you had this interest in technology," I said, serving second helpings of pasta. Bradley glanced at Catherine before responding. "My father has very specific ideas about what constitutes appropriate careers for Wellington men. Technology wasn't on the list unless it involved investing in it, not creating it." "And you never challenged him on this?" He shrugged. "The few times I tried, it didn't go well. Eventually, I stopped trying and focused on being the son he wanted." I nodded, understanding all too well how parents could shape their children's choices, for better or worse. "What about you, Catherine?" I asked. "You mentioned wanting to be involved in this project, too." She twirled pasta around her fork, considering her response. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the wedding, about dignity and building something. All my life, I've been torn between 2 worlds, your world of creation and achievement, and Dad's world of connections and appearances. And you chose your father's world," I stated simply. "I thought I had to," she admitted. "Every time I showed interest in your work, in technology, and building things, Dad would make these comments about how I was becoming just like you, always working, never present." The familiar pain resurfaced, and that was presented as a negative thing. He made it seem like a choice, either be successful like you, or be present and loving like him. I never understood that it wasn't actually a binary choice until I saw you at the wedding. "What do you mean?" "You donated $10 million to help children you'll never meet. That's not the action of someone who doesn't care about people." It made me realize that Dad's narrative about you was just that. Narrative. One that served his purposes. I set down my wine glass, careful to keep my voice steady. "Your father resented my success because it threatened his sense of identity. When we divorced, he needed to justify taking you from me, both to himself and to you. Painting me as work-obsessed and emotionally unavailable served that purpose." "Why didn't you fight harder for custody?" Catherine asked, the question she had clearly wanted to ask for years. I closed my eyes briefly, memories washing over me. "I did fight, Catherine, for months. But your father had connections with the judge, and my work schedule was used against me repeatedly in court. Eventually, my lawyer advised me that continuing to fight would only drag you through more trauma. So you gave up? There was a hint of the old accusation in her voice. No. I pivoted. If I couldn't have equal physical custody, I would ensure you had every advantage I could provide. Education, experiences, opportunities. And I would never, ever speak ill of your father to you, no matter what narratives he was spinning about me. Bradley, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, I admitted. Harder than building my company, harder than fighting sexism in the tech industry. Loving a child you can't be with daily is its own special kind of pain. Catherine wiped away a tear. I had no idea. Dad always made it seem like the custody arrangement was mutual, that you preferred focusing on your company. Of course he did, I said without bitterness. It's easier to exclude someone when you've convinced everyone they wanted to be excluded. A silence fell over the table as Catherine processed this information. Finally, she reached across and took my hand. I'm sorry, Mom, for believing him, for continuing that exclusion at my wedding. I squeezed her hand. You were a child when the narrative was established. Children believe their parents. The wedding, though, that was a choice you made as an adult. She nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. I know, and I can't undo it. But I can make different choices going forward. Such as? I asked. Bradley answered, For starters, we've decided not to move into the Wellington guest house after our honeymoon as originally planned. Oh? This was surprising news. Catherine nodded. We're looking for our own place, somewhere that's ours, not an extension of the Wellington estate. And, Bradley continued, we want to develop this platform properly, not as a hobby, but as a real business. One that could genuinely help charitable organizations. I studied them both, seeing determination in their expressions. That would mean standing up to your families. Charles Wellington won't be pleased to have his son pursuing a tech startup instead of taking his place in the family business. No, he won't, Bradley agreed. And Richard won't be happy about Catherine working with you instead of leveraging her connection to the Wellington name as she's been doing. We know, Catherine said firmly, but the wedding, and your response to it, made us realize something important. We've both been living according to scripts written by other people, scripts that were making us miserable. I considered this for a moment, then stood up and walked to my office. When I returned, I placed a business card on the table. This is Andrea Lawson. She's one of the best angel investors in the tech space, particularly for socially conscious startups. Tell her I sent you. Bradley looked confused. You're not offering to invest yourself? I shook my head. No. If you're serious about this, you need to build it on your own terms, not mine. I'll offer advice when asked, connections where helpful, but not funding. Because you don't believe in the idea? Catherine asked, looking hurt. Because I believe in you, I corrected. Both of you. And because true independence requires taking real risks, not just symbolic ones with a safety net. Understanding dawned. In their expressions. This wasn't rejection. It was respect. Now, I said, rising to clear the dishes. Who wants coffee? We can look at your code structure after dessert, Bradley. I noticed some inefficiencies in your database queries that we should address. As I served tiramisu, I caught Catherine watching me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, something like admiration. It wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start. A chance to rebuild not just their futures, but our relationship, on more honest foundations. 6 months passed, bringing changes I could never have anticipated. Bradley and Catherine had indeed found their own place, a modest but charming house in a neighborhood known for its creative community rather than its prestige. They had also secured their first round of funding for what they now called Transparent Tech, their donation accountability platform. I kept my promise to offer guidance without financial involvement, meeting with them weekly to review progress and provide technical feedback. These meetings gradually evolved beyond business discussions into genuine family dinners, something I had missed for years. Not everyone was pleased with these developments. Richard had called me in a rage when Catherine informed him she would be working with me rather than accepting a position at a prestigious firm that had connections to the Wellingtons. "This is your doing," he had accused. "You couldn't stand that she was finally establishing herself in circles you could never access, so you used that donation stunt to manipulate her." "Our daughter is 32 years old, Richard," I had replied calmly. "Give her the respect of assuming she can make her own decisions." Charles Wellington's response had been more measured but equally disapproving. He had invited me to lunch at his club, naturally, to discuss our children's futures. While I admire self-made success, he had said with the condescension only old money can truly perfect, surely you understand that Bradley has responsibilities to the Wellington legacy. This tech venture is an interesting diversion, but eventually, he must take his place in the family business. "Have you considered," I had responded, "that perhaps your son has his own legacy to build?" The lunch had ended cordially, but coldly. Despite these pressures, Catherine and Bradley remained committed to their new path. Today marked an important milestone: their platform's official launch at a technology conference focused on nonprofit innovations. I arrived at the conference center early, finding a seat near the back of the presentation hall. I hadn't told them I was coming, wanting to observe without creating additional pressure. The room filled quickly with industry professionals, tech journalists, and representatives from various charitable organizations. At precisely 10 a.m., Catherine and Bradley took the stage. I barely recognized my daughter, not because of her appearance, but because of her presence. Gone was the carefully curated persona she had adopted in her efforts to impress the Wellington Circle. In its place was a confident woman who spoke with genuine passion about transparency and charitable giving. 3 years ago, she explained to the audience, I witnessed a $10 million donation to a children's hospital. What struck me wasn't just the amount, but how many questions it raised. How would those funds be used? Who would benefit? How could donors, regardless of the size of their contribution, follow the impact of their giving? My chest tightened at the reference. Catherine had never publicly acknowledged that the donation she referenced was mine. Bradley seamlessly took over, demonstrating the platform's functionality, how it tracked donations from receipt to deployment, how it measured outcomes against stated goals, how it created accountability while protecting privacy. During the Q&A session, a journalist raised his hand. This platform seems to have personal significance for you both. Can you speak to that? Catherine glanced at Bradley before responding. Yes, it does. My mother made a significant donation to the Children's Hospital Foundation last year. Watching that process unfold showed me both the power of giving and the need for greater transparency in how charitable funds are managed. It was the first time she had publicly claimed me as her mother since the wedding. After the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, I waited as Catherine and Bradley were surrounded by interested attendees. I observed with pride as they fielded complex questions, navigated potential partnerships, and represented their vision with clarity and confidence. Finally, as the crowd thinned, Catherine spotted me. Her face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "Mom, you didn't tell us you were coming." She embraced me warmly. "I wanted to see you in your natural habitat," I replied with a smile. Impressive presentation. Bradley joined us, looking equally pleased to see me. "What did you think of the back-end modifications we implemented? The load testing has been promising, but we're concerned about scalability when we—" Catherine laughed, interrupting him. "Maybe save the technical deep dive for after we celebrate?" We were planning to have lunch at that Italian place you mentioned. As we left the conference center, a familiar voice called out, "Catherine, Bradley." We turned to see Richard approaching, looking somewhat out of place among the tech crowd in his expensive suit. Behind him, I was surprised to see Charles and Camilla Wellington. "Dad?" Catherine's voice held a note of confusion. "Mr. and Mrs. Wellington? What are you doing here?" Richard smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did you think we'd miss your big debut? Charles was in town for a board meeting, and I thought it would be nice to support you both." I noticed how he positioned himself as the thoughtful facilitator, taking credit for an appearance that clearly hadn't been planned in advance. Charles Wellington stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Quite an interesting concept you've developed. Several of our foundation board members have been discussing the need for better accountability measures." Bradley straightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Father. We believe it fills an important gap in the philanthropic ecosystem." The awkward tension was palpable. These people had excluded me from my daughter's wedding, had treated her technical interest with disdain, had pressured them both to conform to predetermined roles, and now they were here, presenting themselves as supportive family members. Catherine glanced at me, then back at her father and in-laws. "We were just headed to lunch to celebrate. Mom's joining us." Richard's smile faltered slightly. "Well, perhaps we could all go together? The Wellington Club is just a few blocks away." Before Catherine could respond, I spoke up. "I believe they already have plans, Richard. But I'm sure there will be other opportunities to celebrate their success." Catherine gave me a grateful look before turning to her father. "We have a reservation, Dad, but we'd love to have dinner with you all later this week." Charles Wellington looked as if he wanted to object to being declined, but Camilla placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That sounds lovely. We'll be in town until Sunday. Do let us know what works for your schedule." As they departed, Bradley exhaled audibly. "Thank you for that, Eleanor. The last thing we needed today was 3 hours of subtle criticism at the club." "Old habits die hard," I observed. "They're trying to reassert influence now that they see you might actually succeed on your own terms." Catherine nodded. 6 months ago, I would have canceled our plans and gone with them. It's still hard to say no." "That's because you're kind," I said, surprising myself with the gentle assessment. "You don't want to hurt them, even when they've hurt you. That's not a weakness, but you need to balance it with self-protection." As we walked to the restaurant, Catherine linked her arm through mine, a gesture she hadn't made since she was a teenager. "You know, when I was growing up, Dad always characterized you as cold and calculating. Your mother always puts business first," he'd say. But that was never true, was it? "I made my share of mistakes," I admitted. "There were times when work took precedence when it shouldn't have. But no, the caricature he created wasn't accurate." "I wish I had questioned it more," she said quietly. "Instead of just accepting his version of you, of us." I squeezed her arm, gently. "We can't change the past, Catherine, but this, right now, is a good present." Bradley held the restaurant door open for us, and hopefully the start of a better future, one we're building ourselves, together. As we settled at our table, I looked at these 2 young people who had found the courage to chart their own course despite powerful family pressures. Perhaps my $10 million donation had achieved something even more valuable than funding pediatric research. It had catalyzed a reckoning that might eventually heal old wounds and create new possibilities. "To Transparentech," I said, raising my water glass in a toast, "and to transparency in all things." "To transparency," they echoed, their glasses clinking against mine. 1 year after Transparentech's launch, I received an unexpected invitation to the Wellington family's annual charity gala. In previous years, Catherine had attended these events on Richard's arm, playing the role of devoted daughter while I remained conspicuously uninvited. This year's invitation, addressed formally to Eleanor Harrison, founder and former CEO of Harrison Tech, represented a significant shift. I called Catherine immediately. "Did you strong-arm your in-laws into inviting me to their gala?" I asked without preamble. She laughed. "Hello to you too, Mom. And no, I didn't have to. Transparentech is being honored with their Innovation and Philanthropy Award. Since you've been an integral advisor to the platform's development, it would have been awkward to exclude you." "Ah," I replied. "So it's not a change of heart, just pragmatism. Let's call it evolving perspectives. The Wellingtons remain who they are, but they've developed a grudging respect for what Bradley and I have built, and for your role in it." I considered declining the invitation out of principle, but curiosity won out. How would the Wellingtons handle my presence in their hallowed social sanctum? How would Richard react to seeing me accepted in circles he had long insisted were beyond my reach? The night of the gala arrived, and I dressed with deliberate care, an elegant but modern emerald green gown that emphasized I was not trying to blend in with the country club set. My stylist had convinced me to try a new hairstyle, shorter and more sophisticated than my usual conservative look. The overall effect, as I assessed myself in the mirror, was of a woman comfortable in her own skin and success. My car arrived at the Wellington estate precisely on time. The sprawling mansion was illuminated against the night sky, its manicured grounds lined with luxury vehicles. As I approached the entrance, I spotted Richard and Victoria arriving simultaneously. Richard froze momentarily upon seeing me, then recovered his composure. "Eleanor, this is unexpected." "Is it?" "I received an invitation same as you," I replied pleasantly. "Victoria, lovely to see you again." Victoria, to her credit, seemed less disconcerted than my ex-husband. "Eleanor, that color is stunning on you." Inside, the grand ballroom was decorated with tasteful opulence. Circular tables surrounded a central stage, each setting adorned with fine china and crystal. I located my assigned table near the front, not the most prominent, but certainly not banished to the periphery as I might have expected. I had just taken my seat when Charles Wellington approached, champagne flute in hand. "Eleanor, welcome," he said, his tone cordial if not warm. "I trust you found everything in order?" "The Wellingtons excel at presentation, as always," I replied with a smile that could be interpreted as either complimentary or ironic. He nodded, seeming to choose the former interpretation. "Catherine mentioned you've been instrumental in refining their platform's architecture. Most impressive for someone of your generation." I raised an eyebrow. "The principles of good system design don't change with age, Charles. Only our willingness to recognize them." Before he could respond, Camilla joined us, elegant in a conservative blue gown. "Eleanor, how nice that you could attend. Catherine will be so pleased." "Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing the children receive their award," I replied, deliberately using language that emphasized Catherine and Bradley's comparative youth. Camilla's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed, they've done remarkably well for themselves. Bradley has always had an entrepreneurial streak, of course." I resisted the urge to point out that the Wellingtons had systematically discouraged that streak until recently. Catherine as well. She inherited her technical aptitude from somewhere, after all. As dinner progressed, I observed the subtle dynamics at play. Richard alternated between avoiding my gaze entirely and watching with poorly concealed discomfort. As various guests approached to introduce themselves to me, many, it seemed, were familiar with Harrison Tech or had read about my recent philanthropy. The most surprising encounter came when Justice William Hargrove stopped by my table. He had been a close friend of Richard's for decades, and, I strongly suspected, had influenced the custody outcome during our divorce. "Mrs. Harrison," he said formally, "I understand congratulations are in order. Your daughter's venture is most impressive." Thank you, Justice Hargrove, I replied evenly. Catherine has always been remarkably capable when given the opportunity to pursue her true interests. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps of the subtle reference to how those opportunities had been constrained in the past. Yes, well, he cleared his throat. The next generation often surprises us with their paths. Only when we've been looking in the wrong direction, I responded with a smile. After dinner, Charles Wellington took the stage to present the evening's awards. Several standard recognitions were given for substantial donations and community service before he announced the Innovation in Philanthropy Award. This year's recipients have created a technology platform that is revolutionizing accountability in charitable giving, he began. While unconventional in approach, their work embodies the spirit of responsible philanthropy that the Wellington Foundation has championed for generations. Please welcome Bradley and Catherine Wellington. I noticed immediately that he had used only their married name, effectively claiming their accomplishment for the Wellington family legacy. As Catherine and Bradley took the stage, I wondered if they would correct this subtle erasure. Bradley spoke first, thanking the foundation for the recognition. Then Catherine stepped forward. Thank you, Mr. Wellington, for this honor, she began. Transparentech represents the convergence of two family legacies, the Wellington tradition of philanthropy and the Harrison tradition of technological innovation. I felt a surge of pride as she continued. My mother, Eleanor Harrison, taught me that true success comes not from conforming to others' expectations, but from building something of genuine value. Without her technical guidance and unwavering support, this platform would not exist. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Catherine acknowledged me so publicly. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I felt a complex mix of vindication and healing. In fact, Catherine continued, the inspiration for Transparentech came from watching my mother donate $10 million to establish the Catherine Harrison Pediatric Research Center last year. That act of generosity and the questions it raised about how such funds are utilized sparked our vision for better accountability and philanthropy. A murmur ran through the audience as many connected the dots, realizing that the mother who had been essentially erased from Catherine's wedding was the same woman who had made a donation significant enough to name a research center after her. Hoshutter. As Catherine and Bradley concluded their acceptance speech, I noticed several guests glancing between Richard and me with newfound curiosity. The narrative he had cultivated for years, of the cold, work-obsessed ex-wife unworthy of inclusion in proper society, was unraveling in real time. At the reception following the awards, Catherine found me near the terrace doors. Was that too much? She asked quietly. Mentioning the donation that way? I smiled, genuinely touched by her concern. It was perfect, honest without being vindictive. Dad looks like he swallowed something unpleasant, she observed, glancing across the room where Richard was downing a scotch. That's his problem, not yours, I replied. You've done nothing wrong by acknowledging truth. Bradley joined us, champagne glasses in hand. To the most influential technical advisor Transparentech could have asked for, he said, offering me a drink. As we toasted, Camilla Wellington approached with a society photographer in tow. We must have a photo of the award recipients with their families, she announced. Charles, Richard, Victoria, join us, please. I prepared to step aside, assuming the family photo would follow traditional lines, but Catherine placed a firm hand on my arm. We need my mother in this photo as well, she said clearly. Transparentech wouldn't exist without her. For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Camilla's smile froze, Richard looked stricken, and Charles Wellington's expression darkened slightly. Then, with the social grace that wealth and position had ingrained, Camilla recovered. Of course, she said smoothly. Eleanor, please join us. As we arranged ourselves for the photograph, I found myself standing between Catherine and Charles Wellington, with Richard and Victoria positioned on the opposite side of the group. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I had finally been granted a place in the picture, even if it wasn't quite equal footing. The photographer captured several images, and as we dispersed, Charles Wellington surprised me by saying quietly, "Your daughter is quite remarkable. She has your determination." Coming from him, it wasn't exactly a compliment, but it was an acknowledgement, and sometimes that's enough to begin healing old wounds. 2 years after the Wellington Gala, Transparentech had grown from a promising startup into an industry standard. Over 400 charitable organizations now used their platform, and Catherine and Bradley had expanded their team to 20 employees. The company had recently been featured in Forbes as one of the top social impact startups to watch. My role had evolved as well. While I remained an advisor, Catherine and Bradley had developed their own expertise and confidence. Our weekly meetings had gradually shifted from technical discussions to broader strategic conversations, and eventually to simple family dinners where business was sometimes not discussed at all. One Tuesday evening, as we finished a meal at my home, Catherine seemed unusually quiet. Bradley kept glancing at her encouragingly until finally she set down her wine glass with purpose. "Mom, we have something to tell you," she began. A flutter of concern passed through me. In my experience, those words rarely preceded positive news. "Is everything all right?" I asked cautiously. Catherine smiled, dispelling my worry. "Everything's wonderful, actually. Bradley and I are expecting a baby. You're going to be a grandmother." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Of all the possible announcements, this was one I hadn't prepared for. That's wonderful news," I finally managed, my voice thick with unexpected emotion. Bradley reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "We wanted you to be the first to know." "Before your parents?" I asked, looking at Bradley. He nodded. "We're telling them tomorrow, and Dad the day after." The significance of their choice wasn't lost on me. After years of being relegated to an afterthought in Catherine's life, I was now being placed first in this most important news. "How far along are you?" I asked, practical questions helping me process the emotional impact. 14 weeks, Catherine replied. "We wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell anyone." As we discussed due dates and doctor's appointments, I found myself studying my daughter's face. There was a newfound softness there, a quiet joy that transcended even her professional accomplishments. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly imagine a future where I would be an active, present grandmother, something that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. Later that week, Richard called me unexpectedly. We rarely spoke directly anymore, communicating primarily through Catherine when necessary. "Eleanor," he began without preamble. "Catherine's pregnant." "Yes, I know," I replied calmly. "She told me earlier this week." His momentary silence spoke volumes. "I see. Well, I'm calling because we need to discuss arrangements." "Arrangements? For the baby? Holiday schedules, birthday celebrations? I don't want a repeat of the unpleasantness from Catherine's wedding. It's important that we present a united front for our grandchild." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, taking a deep breath to control my response. "Richard," I said when I returned to the call, "Catherine and Bradley are adults who will make their own decisions about how to involve their parents in their child's life. This isn't a custody arrangement that requires legal negotiation. Don't be difficult." "Eleanor," he snapped, "you know very well how these things work. Family traditions, expectations." "Actually," I interrupted, "I think the past few years have demonstrated that Catherine and Bradley are quite capable of making their own traditions and setting their own expectations. I suggest we both focus on supporting their choices rather than imposing our own." After we hung up, I sat in my office contemplating this new chapter. Richard's call had clarified something important. The patterns of the past would be easily repeated if I allowed it. The competition, the positioning, the subtle undermining. It could all begin again around this innocent child if the adults involved didn't consciously choose a different path. The following weekend, Catherine invited both Richard and me to dinner. At their home. Separately, with Richard and Victoria scheduled to arrive an hour after me. When I questioned this arrangement, Catherine sighed. "One step at a time, Mom. Dad's still processing the fact that we told you first, and that we're planning to use the Harrison name as the baby's middle name, regardless of gender." When I arrived, Catherine gave me a tour of the room they were converting into a nursery. The walls were still blank, the space largely empty except for a few boxes of furniture waiting to be assembled. "We're thinking of a space theme," she explained. "Stars and planets, but sophisticated enough to grow with the child." I smiled, remembering how she had loved stargazing as a little girl. "I still have your old telescope in storage, the one we used to take to the roof of the apartment building." Catherine looked surprised. "You kept that? Even after you moved?" "Of course. I kept everything of yours that you left behind." She was quiet for a moment, then asked hesitantly, "Those weekends we spent looking at stars, were those really your idea? Dad always said you only did science activities because you thought they would make me smarter, not because you enjoyed them." The familiar ache returned, the pain of having my intentions consistently reframed and distorted. "Catherine, those were some of my favorite memories. Yes, I wanted to encourage your interest in science, but mainly because it was something we shared, something that connected us." She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about narratives lately, how the stories we're told shape our understanding of reality. When I look back now, I can see how many of the stories I believed about you were actually Dad's interpretations, not my own experiences." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, signaling Richard and Victoria's arrival. Catherine squeezed my hand briefly before going to answer it. I took a moment to compose myself before following her downstairs. Dinner was polite, but tense. Richard made several references to Wellington traditions for newborns and spoke at length about the excellent private preschools near his home that would naturally be considered when the time came. I noticed Catherine and Bradley exchanging glances but saying little to contradict these assumptions. After dessert, as we moved to the living room for coffee, Bradley finally spoke up. "Richard, Victoria, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, Catherine and I will be making our own decisions about our child's education and upbringing." Richard waved his hand dismissively. Of course. I'm simply outlining the options that align with family expectations." "That's exactly what we need to discuss," Catherine said firmly. "This baby represents a new beginning, an opportunity to break cycles that haven't served any of us well." Victoria looked confused. "What cycles? Your father has always wanted the best for you." "The cycles of competition between our parents," Catherine clarified, looking directly at Richard and then at me. "The positioning, the narrative shaping, the subtle tug-of-war that's defined so much of my life." Richard stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about. If there's been any competition, it wasn't initiated by me. I could have argued, could have cited dozens of examples over the years, but instead I said simply, what matters now isn't assigning blame, but choosing a better way forward." Catherine nodded gratefully. "Exactly. Bradley and I want our child to have relationships with all their grandparents, relationships that aren't complicated by adult grievances or old wounds." "That sounds reasonable," Victoria offered, perhaps sensing Richard's growing defensiveness. "We're not asking for forced friendliness," Bradley added. "Just mutual respect and an agreement to focus on what's best for the baby, rather than on past conflicts." Richard looked as if he wanted to object, but something in Catherine's expression stopped him. For perhaps the first time, he seemed to recognize that continuing to frame me as the adversary would only damage his relationship with his daughter. I suppose we can manage civility, he conceded reluctantly. I smiled slightly. Civility is a good start. As Richard and Victoria prepared to leave, Catherine pulled me aside. Thank you for not rising to his bait. I know it's not easy. Some things are more important than being right, I replied, resting my hand briefly on her still flat stomach. Some legacies matter more than old arguments. 6 months later, I found myself in a hospital waiting room, an experience that brought back memories both painful and poignant. When Catherine had been born, Richard and I had still been happily married, our future together seemingly secure. Now I sat across from him and Victoria, all of us waiting for news of Catherine's labor. Bradley appeared periodically with updates, his face a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Still at 4 centimeters, he reported during one such visit. The doctor says it could be several more hours. Richard checked his watch. I have a conference call at 4. Perhaps I should step out and reschedule it, I said firmly. Some things only happen once. He looked startled by my direct intervention, but after a moment nodded. You're right. I'll have my assistant move it. The hours stretched on. Evening, we had settled into an uneasy coexistence, exhaustion and shared concern temporarily suspending the usual tensions. Even the Wellingtons had arrived, Charles pacing the waiting room with barely concealed impatience while Camilla engaged in polite but distant conversation with Victoria. Around 8 p.m., a nurse approached. Ms. Harrison, she said, looking at me. Your daughter is asking for you. Richard immediately stood. I'll come too, the nurse hesitated. She specifically asked for her mother right now. I'm sure you'll be called in soon, sir. As Richard reluctantly sat back down, I caught a fleeting expression on his face. The same mixture of hurt and resentment I had seen countless times when Catherine chose me over him. For once, I felt no satisfaction in it, only a weary recognition of how deeply ingrained our patterns had become. Catherine was pale and exhausted when I entered her room, but her eyes lit up upon seeing me. Mom, she said, reaching for my hand. I wanted to talk to you before things get too intense. I moved to her bedside, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Scared, she admitted. Not just of the pain, but of what comes after, of being someone's mother. The vulnerability in her voice touched me deeply. This was my accomplished, confident daughter, the woman who built companies and navigated complex social dynamics, suddenly feeling as uncertain as any first-time mother throughout history. That's normal, I assured her. I felt the same way before you were born. She squeezed my hand. Did you? Dad always said you were completely calm and methodical, like it was just another project to manage. I smiled ruefully. Your father wasn't in the room when I cried from sheer terror the night before my induction. My mother was. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. I never knew that. There's a lot about those early years that got rewritten over time, I said gently. But the truth is, I was terrified of failing you, of not knowing how to be the mother you deserved. And now I'm afraid of the same thing, she whispered. Fear means you care deeply. It means you understand the magnitude of what's happening. That awareness, that humility, is precisely what will make you a good mother. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, How did you do it? Juggle everything, me, your career, all of it? Imperfectly, I admitted. I made mistakes. I missed things I wish I hadn't. But I always tried to make sure you knew you were loved, that you were my priority even when circumstances forced difficult choices. A contraction interrupted our conversation, Catherine gripping my hand tightly as she breathed through the pain. When it passed, she said, I've been thinking about what you said before, about narratives shaping reality. I've spent so many years seeing you through Dad's eyes. I want my child to see all their grandparents clearly, not through someone else's filter. That's a worthy goal, I said. though not always an easy one. Will you help me? Help us find that balance? The question held echoes of the little girl who once asked me to help her balance on her first bicycle. Always, I promised. When Bradley returned, Catherine asked him to invite Richard in as well. Seeing my surprise, she explained, "I want both of you here. This is too important for old divisions." Richard entered cautiously, nodding stiffly in my direction before focusing entirely on Catherine. For the next hour, the four of us waited together through increasingly frequent contractions. The dynamics were awkward but functional, a microcosm of what family gatherings might look like in the future. When the doctor announced it was time to move to delivery, Catherine looked at Bradley, then at Richard and me. "I want Mom in the delivery room with us," she said clearly. "If that's okay with you, Bradley." Bradley nodded immediately. "Of course. Whatever you need." Richard's expression tightened momentarily before he controlled it. "I'll wait out here with the Wellingtons," he said, leaning to kiss Catherine's forehead. "You're going to do wonderfully." In the delivery room, I stood at Catherine's shoulder while Bradley held her hand, offering encouragement through the final intense stages of labor. When my granddaughter finally arrived, red-faced and indignant at the brightness and cold, I felt an overwhelming surge of emotion that transcended all the complicated history that had led to this moment. "Olivia Harrison Wellington," Catherine announced, tears streaming down her face as the tiny infant was placed on her chest. "After my grandmother," I gasped softly. My mother's name had never been discussed as a possibility during Catherine's pregnancy. This unexpected tribute to my side of the family, a connection Catherine had often seemed ambivalent about, felt like a profound gesture of reconciliation. Later, when the initial flurry of medical activity had subsided and Olivia was sleeping peacefully in Catherine's arms, I found myself studying 3 generations of Harrison women with a sense of wonder. Despite all the efforts to minimize my influence, to rewrite our connection, here was undeniable evidence of continuity. A new branch on a family tree that had weathered significant storms. When we returned to the waiting room to introduce Olivia to her other grandparents, I watched Richard hold his granddaughter with visible emotion. The Wellingtons crowded around, Charles uncharacteristically demonstrative as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "She has the Wellington chin," Camilla declared confidently. "And Eleanor's eyes," Bradley added, glancing at me with a small smile. "Those are definitely Harrison eyes." Rather than contradicting this observation as I might have expected, Richard nodded. "She does have your eyes, Eleanor. The same shape Catherine had as a newborn." This simple acknowledgement that I had contributed something essential to the genetic tapestry of his granddaughter felt like a subtle shift in our long-standing narrative. In the days that followed, as Catherine and Bradley adjusted to parenthood, I found myself in the unexpected position of offering guidance not just to my daughter, but occasionally to Richard as well. When he expressed confusion about current infant sleep recommendations that contradicted what we had practiced with Catherine, I explained the research rather than highlighting his ignorance. "Parenting advice changes with new information," I told him during one such conversation. "What matters is that Olivia is surrounded by people who love her, even if we sometimes approach that love differently." He studied me for a moment before responding. "You've become rather philosophical in your old age, Eleanor." "Not philosophical, just tired of fighting battles that don't matter anymore." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how my $10 million donation, intended as a pointed statement during Catherine's wedding, had set in motion a series of events I could never have anticipated. What began as an act of defiance had evolved into a catalyst for healing, for reclaiming relationships that had seemed irretrievably broken. Little Olivia, oblivious to the complex history surrounding her birth, had created a new center of gravity for our fractured family system. We were all still learning to orbit this new star without colliding with each other. a delicate celestial dance that required constant adjustments and occasional course corrections. But for the first time in decades, it felt like we were moving towards something rather than away from it. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable return on my investment. I understand your concern about the time jumps. Let me revise Part 10 to remove the time jump, keeping it in the same time frame as the previous chapters, focusing on Olivia's infancy. Then Part 11 can contain the 5-year time jump as originally written. 3 months after Olivia's birth, I settled into a new routine that revolved around weekly visits to Catherine and Bradley's home. These Thursdays quickly became the highlight of my week. A few precious hours with my granddaughter and a gradual rebuilding of the mother-daughter relationship I had once feared was irreparably damaged. Today, as I arrived at their modest house, I found Catherine looking particularly exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes as she bounced a fussing Olivia on her hip. "Rough night?" I asked, setting down the bag of groceries I'd brought. "She's teething," Catherine explained, relief flooding her face as she passed the baby to me. "Bradley had to travel for a meeting with potential investors. I haven't slept. More than 2 hours at a stretch." I cradled Olivia against my shoulder, her tiny body immediately relaxing as I swayed gently from side to side. "The frozen washcloth trick still works wonders, you know. It helped you when you were this age." "I tried that," Catherine sighed, collapsing onto the couch. "Along with every other remedy recommended on every parenting website. Nothing works for more than 30 minutes. I smiled sympathetically. "Why don't you go take a nap? I've got her for the next few hours." "Are you sure?" "I don't want to take advantage." "Catherine," I interrupted gently. "This is what grandmothers are for. Get some rest." As Catherine disappeared gratefully into her bedroom, I settled into the rocking chair with Olivia, humming softly as I had once done for her mother. The familiar motion and melody soon had the baby drifting into a peaceful sleep, her tiny fingers curled around my thumb. I studied her face, the perfect miniature features, the long eyelashes resting against rounded cheeks. There was something of Catherine there, certainly, but also hints of Bradley, of Richard, even of the Wellington lineage. And yes, as Bradley had noted at the hospital, something of me as well, particularly around the eyes. I was still rocking when the doorbell rang an hour later. Careful not to disturb Olivia, I rose slowly and made my way to the entrance, surprised to find Richard standing on the doorstep. "Eleanor," he said, equally startled. "I didn't expect you to be here." "Thursday is my regular visit," I explained quietly, gesturing to the sleeping baby in my arms. "Catherine's resting. Rough night with teething." Richard nodded, his expression softening as he looked at his granddaughter. "Victoria sent over some teething tablets that helped her niece. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop them off." "That's thoughtful," I said, genuinely meaning it. "Would you like to come in for a bit? She'll probably sleep for another half hour at least." He hesitated before stepping inside, moving with uncharacteristic uncertainty in a space he clearly didn't visit often. We settled in the living room, the sleeping baby creating a natural focus for our attention that made the usual tension between us less pronounced. "You look comfortable with her," Richard observed after a moment. "It's like riding a bicycle," I replied. "You never really forget," he smiled faintly. "I remember how you were with Catherine as a baby. You always had the magic touch when she was fussy." The comment surprised me, an acknowledgement of early parenting memories we rarely referenced. "You weren't so bad yourself," I offered, "especially with the midnight feedings." A comfortable silence settled between us as we both watched Olivia sleep. There was something surreal about sitting peacefully in the same room with Richard after so many years of strained interactions and pointed barbs. "I've been thinking," Richard said finally, his voice careful, "about what Catherine said in the hospital, about how our competition has affected her." "As have I admitted. It wasn't always like this between us, he continued, his gaze still fixed on Olivia. Before the divorce, before success changed things, we were partners. I nodded slowly. Success didn't change things, Richard. Your response to my success did. He looked up, a flash of the old defensiveness crossing his features before he visibly tamped it down. Perhaps that's fair. It challenged my sense of identity when your career eclipsed mine, and justified a narrative that positioned me as deficient as a mother, I added quietly. Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. I told myself it was for Catherine's benefit, that she needed stability, tradition. She needed both her parents supporting each other, not undermining each other. Yes, he conceded. I see that more clearly now. Olivia stirred in my arms, making the little snuffling sounds that preceded waking. Richard leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. May I? He asked, extending his arms. I carefully transferred the baby to him, watching as he settled her against his chest with surprising tenderness. Olivia blinked up at him, momentarily confused, before breaking into a toothless smile of recognition. There's my girl, Richard murmured, all pretense of dignity forgotten. The front door opened, and Bradley entered, looking tired from travel, but brightening immediately at the domestic scene before him. Richard, he greeted, setting down his briefcase. I didn't know you were visiting today. Just dropping off some teething remedies, Richard explained, not taking his eyes off Olivia, and getting some quality time with this little one. Is Catherine still asleep? Bradley asked, looking toward the bedroom. Going on 2 hours now, I confirmed. She was exhausted. Bradley nodded gratefully. Thank you for that, both of you. These first months have been more challenging than we expected. It gets easier, Richard and I said simultaneously, then exchanged surprised glances. And harder in different ways, I added. Worth every moment, though, Richard finished. Bradley smiled, observing our rare moment of accord with evident approval. I know Catherine appreciates having you both involved, even if she doesn't always express it well. Especially during this sleep-deprived phase. As if on cue, Catherine appeared in the hallway, looking rumpled but considerably more rested. She stopped short at the sight of both her parents sitting amicably in her living room, her father cradling, her daughter while conversing peacefully with her husband. Am I still dreaming? She asked, only half joking. Your father brought some teething remedies, I explained. We've been having a surprisingly civil conversation about the good old days. The good old days? Catherine raised an eyebrow. I wasn't aware you two acknowledged any days as good in your shared history. There were more than you might think, Richard replied, gently bouncing Olivia as she began to fuss. Before complications set in. Catherine looked between us skeptically. And this newfound nostalgia is because your daughter deserves better than to inherit our dysfunction, I said simply. And because holding this little one, Richard added, looking down at Olivia, puts things in perspective, Catherine. Crossed the room to take her daughter from Richard, her expression thoughtful. Well, whatever's caused this ceasefire, I hope it lasts. It's nice not feeling caught in the crossfire for once. As the evening approached, I prepared to leave, gathering my things while Catherine fed Olivia and Bradley prepared dinner. Richard, too, was making his departure, and we found ourselves walking out to our cars together. This was unexpected, I commented as we reached the driveway, but not entirely unpleasant, he acknowledged. No, I agreed. Not entirely. Do you think we can maintain this? For Olivia's sake? He asked, a rare vulnerability in his question. I considered for a moment before answering. I think we can try. Not because we'll suddenly become friends, but because some things matter more than old grievances. Richard nodded, opening his car door. Next Thursday is your regular visit? Yes. Perhaps I could stop by the following week then. establish my own routine that doesn't overlap and create tension. I recognized the olive branch for what it was, an acknowledgement of boundaries, an effort to create separate but parallel relationships with our shared family. I think that would be wise, I replied. A good start. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how differently things were unfolding than I could have anticipated that day at the wedding reception. My donation, made partly from pain, had created ripples of healing that continued to expand in unexpected ways. The $10 million check had been a statement about my worth, my place, my right to recognition. But its true value had emerged in what followed. The reconciliation with Catherine, the gradual rebuilding of family connections, and now, this tentative truce with Richard. Some investments yield returns beyond calculation. This, it seemed, had been mine. 5 years passed in a blur of milestones and memories. Catherine and Bradley did purchase the house on Maple Street, and I found a comfortable townhome just 10 minutes away. True to their word, they maintained clear boundaries while welcoming regular involvement from all grandparents. Richard and Victoria lived 20 minutes in one direction, the Wellingtons 30 minutes in the other, a geographic arrangement that somehow balanced the complex family ecosystem. Transparentech had grown into a respected industry leader, expanding beyond charitable giving to governmental transparency initiatives. Catherine and Bradley had welcomed a second child, a son named James, who was now 2 years old and adored his big sister. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Patricia Reynolds at the Children's Hospital Foundation. "Eleanor, I hope I'm not disturbing you," she began, her voice warm with familiarity after years of regular updates on the research center's progress. "Not at all. How are things at the center?" "Wonderful, actually. That's why I'm calling. The Catherine Harrison Pediatric Research Center has been selected for the National Innovation in Medicine Award. The committee specifically cited our breakthrough work on childhood autoimmune disorders." "That's extraordinary," I replied, genuinely pleased. The center had exceeded all expectations, developing treatments that had already improved thousands of children's lives. "They want to honor you at the awards ceremony next month," Dr. Reynolds continued, "as the founding donor whose vision made this possible." "Me? Surely the researchers deserve the recognition. They'll be honored as well, of course. But the committee was particularly impressed by the story behind your donation. How a gift made at a difficult personal moment transformed into something so profoundly beneficial." I was silent for a moment, remembering that day at Catherine's wedding. The hurt, the anger, the determination to be acknowledged. "Catherine should be recognized too," I said finally. "It's her name on the center, after all." "We've already invited her and Bradley. They're delighted to attend." After we ended the call, I sat in my garden contemplating how differently things had unfolded than I could have imagined that day at the wedding reception. My donation, made partly from pain, had created ripples of healing that extended far beyond my family. To children I would never meet, to families facing medical crises I would never know. That evening, as we gathered for our weekly family dinner, at Catherine and Bradley's home, I shared the news about the award. "Mom, that's incredible," Catherine exclaimed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "The real credit belongs to the researchers," I demurred. "But they wouldn't have had the opportunity without your funding," Bradley pointed out. "You should be proud." 6-year-old Olivia, always attentive to adult conversations, looked up from her dinner. "What did Grandma do?" Catherine smiled at her daughter. "Remember how we've told you that Grandma Eleanor helped build a special place where doctors learn how to make sick children better? They're giving her an award because that place has helped lots and lots of kids." Olivia considered this solemnly. "Like when I had strep throat and the medicine made me better?" "Even bigger than that," Bradley explained, "for kids with very serious illnesses." Olivia turned to me, her eyes wide with newfound admiration. "So you're like a superhero for sick kids, Grandma?" I laughed softly. "Hardly a superhero, sweetheart. Just someone who had the means to help and chose to use it. That's what makes someone a hero, Catherine said quietly. Not the recognition, but the choice to help when you can. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.